This is Mike Hannewald, field agronomist with Beck's Hybrids, and have some information wanted to share today in regard to weed management, specifically in soybeans. So as we get to the first of the year here, it's time to start thinking about prepaying inputs for the coming year, and part of that is putting together plans for how we're going to keep our fields clean and to be able to know what herbicides we want to purchase and at what rates. And so have some information that's been accumulated over the years through Beck's Practical Farm Research Program, through some of our weed management studies that we've done, and have kind of simplified it down to about a 4-step process specifically for managing weeds in soybeans. So we'll start off with step 1. So starting clean. Seems like pretty common sense. Before we get those beans planted or shortly after those beans planted, we want to make sure that we get all the weeds that are out there killed so that we have a nice clean field to start. And so if we're in a no-till or a minimum tillage environment, that relies on a solid burn down program. So in most cases, it's going to be glyphosate or Roundup plus pick your chemical to help assist with broadleaf. So 2,4-D, dicamba, sharpen, any of those are good options. Obviously you need to pick that depending on what your soybean herbicide trait is and the variety of beans, but those options work as well, and there's also options that don't involve glyphosate. If you want to use gramoxone, that can be another option to help get that nice clean field to start with. If you're relying on tillage to tear out your weeds and give you that nice clean start, it's just very important to make sure that the weeds are actually being uprooted. So take the time as you're setting your tillage tool and deciding what depth to run to take a walk out behind that tool and just pull up on some of those weeds that you see laying on the surface and make sure that the roots are actually torn up. We continue on with step 2, and that involves your pre-emerge residual. So applying a pre-emerge with 3 modes of action is what we found to be most successful in our PFR studies. So when we've applied pre-emerge residuals with 1 mode of action, we get about 60% control of water hemp when we evaluate it 45 days after it was sprayed. 2 modes of action bumped us up to 89%, but 3 modes of action gives us 97% control of water hemp 45 days after treatment was made. And so that's something that I think is really important, to get those 3 modes of action out there. We have the best chance of stopping weeds from emerging, and that is the easiest weed to keep out of the field is one that never grows. And so so getting that residual laid down so that we can keep that field clean. Options that we have here, so there's 4 primary groups of pre-emerge herbicides that provide you with residual weed control. So group 2 are your ALS inhibitors, group 5 are photosystem 2 inhibitors, group 14 are your PPO inhibitors, and then group 15 are your long-chain fatty acid inhibitors. So those are the 4 main ones. If you have XtendFlex soybeans, group 4, which would be your synthetic auxins or dicamba, that counts as well. So if you're using dicamba in a burn down, dicamba does have some residual control and can be a great choice there. Now, obviously the PPO inhibitors, if you have cold wet conditions at soybean emergence, might slow those beans down, but a lot of times the beans might look kind of tough, but they do, once we have some more favorable weather, can come out of that. But if that's a problem you deal with, pick 3 other groups. So those 4, potentially 5 different herbicide groups as far as mode of action goes, pick 3 of those to help keep that field clean. We move on to step 3, which is our post-spray pass. And post-spraying by the calendar as opposed to by what the weeds look like. So if we're waiting until we have a weedy mess in our field, we've waited too long. And so those pre-emerge herbicides that we're laying down give us 3 to 4 weeks of protection. And so we want to be targeting that post-spray 3 to 4 weeks later. And you might struggle from the sprayer to see that many weeds out in the field, but we want to get that out there a little bit earlier and target weeds that are 6 inches or less. It's far easier to kill smaller weeds successfully. It's also a good idea to get this done before crop canopy, before those beans canopy, so that we can get better coverage of the weeds that are small and down below the soybeans. And then also that helps get our step 4 herbicide down to the soil surface, which we'll talk about in a second. As far as post-herbicide options go, whether you're using a Extend Flex system or an Enlist herbicide system, I still really like the Liberty as your primary post option. So Liberty and Clethodim, that gets your volunteer corn. Liberty and Roundup can do very well also. If you have some weeds that are getting bigger, Liberty and Enlist is a great program to help take down weeds that got too large. Maybe it was too wet to get across timely with the sprayer. That can be a good choice. The reason I'm a big fan of the Liberty herbicide post is because we're adding in an additional mode of action. We've already used 2,4-D or dicamba in our pre-emerge, and so when we come back and post-spray that, it's nice to use something different. And Liberty is something we're pretty much only going to use post on soybeans, and that's really the only time in our herbicide program we might use that. And anything we can do to mix up those modes of action is going to keep these herbicides working effectively much longer. Another reason why it's important to post-spray by the calendar and not let the weeds get too large specifically deals with water hemp. And so you can see in the picture on your screen a large water hemp plant after it was sprayed, about a week after it was sprayed with Liberty, and you can see that when you look at it from above the soybeans, it looks like it's brown and crispy and dead, looks great. But the problem with water hemp is it has a lot of nodes down near the bottom of the plant. And if the beans get too large and the weed gets too large, you're not going to get good coverage of those lower leaves, and you can see that it's starting to shoot new leaves out of those lower nodes, and so we didn't entirely kill it. So it's really important to get those weeds while they're small. Step 4, last thing to do, is to use an in-season residual herbicide. So if we're spraying by the calendar, we're spraying 3 to 4 weeks after we lay down our residual, and we're spraying before the beans are canopied, our fear might be that we're leaving a window open that there can be more weeds that are going to emerge yet. And so using an in-season residual, adding it to that Liberty, Liberty and Clethodim, or Liberty and Roundup, or Liberty and Enlist pass, adding it to that will lay that down and come in contact with the soil and can help to stop any further emergence of any new weeds until the soybean canopy is good and covered, and will then give us control the rest of the season. And so groups 2 and 15 can usually be applied post emergence on soybeans with very minimal crop response. And so the group 15s though do tend to be better on smaller seeded broadleaves like water hemp. So first rate is a group tool, but then dual, warrant, zidua are all group 15s that can work very well and usually have minimal crop response when they are applied late. Now, in our PFR testing, we've seen that when we add that in-season residual, we go from 88% control of water hemp at harvest time up to 94% control of water hemp at harvest. So that's about a 6% increase. Now 6% might not seem like a whole lot until you think about what is that 6% increase in control really worth. And our PFR team did the math and did the calculations and found that a 6% increase in control results in 17.1 million viable water hemp seeds per acre less out in the field for next year's seed bank. And so this in-season residual not only keeps our field clean for this year, but also helps to reduce our seed bank for the future. So to wrap up, to summarize here, the key message here for managing weeds in soybean is to stop weeds before they start. So starting out with a clean field with either tillage or a burn down pass, apply a pre-emerge with 3 modes of action that can be mixed in with your burn down or applied after your tillage pass. Step 3, post-spraying by the calendar while the weeds are still very small and we still have ability to get that herbicide down to the soil to hit those weeds. And then also step 4, then using that in-season residual herbicide with that post-pass and helping to keep that field clean for a longer period of time after that post is applied until those soybeans are canopied, and then shading out any new weeds that get started. So hopefully you found that helpful and can help guide your program. Obviously every situation and every farm is going to be a little bit different, but these are 4 things to keep in mind as you plan your soybean herbicide program. So with that, if you have any questions about this or any other agronomic topic, feel free to reach out to myself or your local Beck's representative, and we would be happy to help.